So Ayala thought of this a few years ago that we could share stories of objects that have been handed down to us by ancestors. And so this is maybe the third year that we've done this tradition as part of our Yom Kippur service. So Ayala said I should start. So, and she said to bring an object, but these objects that I thought of are too big. One is a tablecloth and one is a table. So, probably about 20 years ago, my mom's best friend, Faggy, and I referred to her in the story last night as the one who I asked about Judaism because she's more observant than our family. Before Faggy died of cancer, and she was kind of after my mom died, as I said, very young at 52, I was only 23. Faggy was my sort of substitute mom and substitute grandparent for my kids. And when she was dying of cancer, she said, I want to give you this tablecloth. And it is a beautiful white linen Shabbat tablecloth that her mother embroidered by hand. And it says Shabbat Shalom, and it has a whole space in the middle, and it's got beautiful, it must have taken, years to embroider it. And it's this beautiful white linen, and I've washed it many times. It has a little hole in it, as in there's a crack in everything. And David keeps urging me to get it repaired, but you don't just repair linen with the hole. There's companies that do it, but I'm afraid to send it off into the universe. I need to keep it close. So it has its hole. But underneath it is this beautiful wooden antique table that was my mother's, but it wasn't the table that I grew up with. It was kind of my mother's liberation table. When all of us children had grown, my mother got what she wanted. We had lived in suburbia, and that included kind of plasticky furniture and all of the accoutrements of suburbia. My mom really wanted to live near the ocean, so she and my dad moved to the beach near Marina del Rey, kind of between that and Venice. And she got to buy some beautiful antiques. And she bought this beautiful table and chairs, which I eventually got. And one thing I want to say about it is that I got it via my sister, who got it first, because she had a bigger house then, and then when she downsized, it came to me. And when we remodeled our house to make a bigger dining room, and my sister said to me, I'm sorry to tell you that I've done some damage to the table, because my sister's an artist and a craftsperson. And she said, I tried to get things out, but you can never get out glitter. And there's little shiny particles that remind me of my beautifully creative sister. And now it's the art table for our grandchildren for when little Davis comes and Milton, and when they do their artwork, well, there's more glitter. So those are the objects. And I wanted to also say that Faggy said to me when she gave me the table, I'm giving it to you because my children won't use it. And I have sent photos of us rollicking Shabbat with that tablecloth to her daughter, Sarah. And I recently saw her daughter. Every time she comes to town, Faggy's daughter comes and we have dinner with her. And she said, she had asked to have dinner, and it was right before Rosh Hashanah. I said, we're kind of busy. But we did have dinner with her, and she said, oh yeah, when is Rosh Hashanah? Yeah, I've got to tell my kids. She said, I'm so glad they've all agreed to be secular Jews, she said cultural Jews. And I thought, man, with that tablecloth and the Shabbats we have, you don't know what you're missing. So I thank you, Faggy, and my mom for their treasures. And I want to call up Deborah Rosenberg for another Mishpocha story. And Deborah is a former student of David's and mine, and now she's a Magida on her own.
This is very daunting. Some weeks ago, my mother, Carol Rosenberg, hi Mom, moved here from California, and my younger brother Mike came to help. He's that kind of guy. We were in the garage sorting tools and gardening implements when suddenly my brother pulled something out of a box that stopped me in my tracks. It didn't look like much. It's a long green bag. U.S. Army issue, OD green, olive drab. Along the sides, it says Alan M. Rosenberg and U.S. Army. Alan M. Rosenberg was our older brother. He's no longer with us. He died 40-odd years ago in a 2-truck accident on a lonely road in Italy. The last time I saw the duffel bag, my brother was carrying it. On that particular August morning, my brother and I had wrestled the bag, massively bulgy, out of a taxicab and into Penn Station, where my brother was going to take the train to DC to meet his unit. The bag weighed tons. If you've been to Penn Station, it's chaos. There are people milling everywhere. We're all waiting for the big board to announce which door our train would leave from. And the board has these had, back in the day, these great flip numbers, so you can hear the sound of the flipping. People are milling, numbers are flipping. My brother and I are making desultory conversation, the kind you make when you don't know what to say. And finally, the board announced, door number 9, the train to DC. Like many other people, we shuffled over, we're dragging this bag, and we get in line. And there are many people in line, but it's a loose line. And gradually the line moves forward, and then my brother is 2 people from the door. It's just a big doorway, marked number 9, where when you step through, you go down the ramp to your train. We stood for a moment. He turned fully toward me, and I looked at my brother, tall and handsome and beautifully dressed in his uniform. He was polished, his buttons were gleaming, his boots were actually, literally, spit shone. I'd never seen a thing. He wore his hat at the appropriate rakish angle over his dark curls. We looked at each other, my blue eyes, his blue eyes, our father's blue eyes. He smiled the devastating grin, which I understand comes from my grandfather, my mom's dad, for whom my brother Alan, is named. We looked at each other for a long moment. Many words weren't said. Many words were understood. And then he stood up even straighter, if such a thing were possible, and he saluted. And then he turned and he stepped through the door and he was gone. That duffel bag now hangs in my garage. I'm not asking it to hold tools as it did for my mom. It's just itself. It's sturdy Army issue, OD green. It will last forever. And every once in a while, on my way to flip the laundry or get a screwdriver, I touch the bag where the strap touched his shoulder. As he left, he pulled that heavy bag onto his shoulder like we've seen soldiers do in every movie, and he carried it weightlessly. So I put my hand just inside the strap where it rested on the hollow of his shoulder, my brother's bag. It might just look like Army surplus. It may look like a relic of no war. To me, it's the empty vessel that holds that moment, that day, the day my brother saluted me. Shana Tova.
Thank you so much. Really got me and all of us in the heart. Beautifully told. Our next teller is Alan Weisbard. Where is Alan? Here he is. Okay.
Well, in a way, this is a very modern story since it kind of happened at 3 a.m. this morning. I was on the list to do it because I love doing it, and I went through all kinds of who I was going to talk about and this and that. And then I had a dream during the night, and there was a little bit of Devorah's story and a little bit of how things used to be at Yom Kippur in the Havurah, where way back when people would actually sleep in the synagogue often, because Zalman had a whole thing in Hasidim of the dream assembly and connection. So I woke up I still didn't know what I was going to talk. I'm a spontaneous guy. I had like options. And it was this amazing dream. This was like in the Catskills at a retreat center. And my mom was so young and had this kind of not short dress, but just a young lady's dress, a young person's dress, which I can't remember her in. She was in the kitchen at this retreat center. And then my dad, who had died at 56, fairly young, and before he could really enjoy life, before he was able to do those out breaths, had his World War II, had tough life. And he had appeared in this like pleated pants and the suit. And she was so frivolous in a way and just enjoying herself. And it actually reminded me now of one of her happiest things was, oh my God, putting on the Passover Seder we had a ping pong table, and for as many people as could fit around a ping pong table. And Rosh Hashanah was smaller, but she was like in that mood of joy. And my dad was sort of rigid. And then he took off his tie and he kind of took off his jacket. And then going to your dream, or not your dream, the story, and integrating my dream, I was there. And if someone knows Gematria, whatever, I was there to find his room in this complex web of 6931. I wrote that down, so I remembered that. And I was looking, and it was hard to get to. But then we found it, and he was able to just take off that, oh my God, this, Mad Men or whatever, the suits they had to wear and the thing that they had to dress. And then I just saw him enjoy. So one of the regrets that I said earlier is I'm really not good with pictures. I got boxes, but they're not organized. So I do have a box that I just went through this morning. And I haven't seen this picture in a really long time. I mean, like a really long time. And it's, so I was born in 1950, so my dad's probably around 31 and my mom's probably around 28. So it's my mom, my dad holding me. And I'll just say welcome.
Such heart-opening stories. Ari Golden is going to share a story with us. When I was in third grade, we moved from Boston to South Bend, Indiana to Chicago. There was a lot of commotion that happened, and we ended up going back where my parents grew up in Chicago in my third grade year. And when we moved there, after quite a lot of chaos, my grandmother, Nisi, I called her Grandma Nisi, Bernice Friedman, she was an anchor in my life in a way that nobody else was. It was just such a balm to be with her, and she shaped me so significantly. And we would go on ladies' days, and she would pick me up, and she would get all dressed up, and she was so fancy, and she was a real estate agent, and she had the most elegant style, and I just loved her so much. There was a time where I lived in New York City, and she just had to see me, so she flew out for the day. And just to take me to breakfast and to the theater, and then we just walked and held hands the whole time. And such a treasure of a relationship. And this is a picture of me with her and my brother. And so I got married 20 years ago this month. And this is my bedecken with my grandmother Nisi in the circle among other beloveds. And it was an exceptional wedding. It was in Mill Valley, California. I'm grateful to have married my Basheret, and my grandmother made the most exquisite speech at my wedding. And we had this little box that was this box of blessings. So on our 5th anniversary, we would open the box and receive everyone's blessings. And so I remember watching Nisi writing her blessing to me and putting it in the box. I was excited to read it in 5 years. And actually, I'll just say this, that on our 5th wedding anniversary, I opened it. Jay and I opened the box and it said, "May you always have what you need and never have to need what you want," which I thought was really profound. So 9 days after our wedding, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, my grandma Nisi was driving and she stopped at a stop sign, and a professor from Northwestern University hit her and in a car, and the impact was so great that she sort of lost her senses and she was disoriented, and she drove her car into the side of a church. And it was just so devastating, beyond devastating. And when they pulled her out, it was all internal bleeding, so she wasn't bleeding at all. And all these children came out of the church and circled my grandmother as the paramedics were taking her out of the car, and they were blessing her. And this little boy came up and he said, "The most beautiful lady came out of the car." So that was 20 years ago this week. And this picture is, my son is 18, he just left for college. And this is him when he was a baby looking at the picture of my grandparents. And I've just, yeah, the memory of her is so strong, and it is so powerful to know that how we love while we're alive in these bodies does not die. And our relationship is deep proof of that. Thank you. Ayantif.
Holy tears. So I want to share with you stories about my grandmother. And most of you know that my son recently left to move to Israel. And he was here for 3 months, getting ready, preparing things, the paperwork, the endless paperwork, and clearing things out of my garage, which was filled to the brim, because we had never done that since we moved here in 2001 when he was 9. And why were we clearing it now? Because he wanted to store his car in my garage. So we had a lot of work to do, and we had a lot of fun doing it, reminiscing over photos and, children's books. Every title he picked up, we'd go, "Oh, remember that one?" And then we came to these big bags of handwork made by my grandmother. And I brought just a little sample here. This was a curtain, and she did so much of this handwork. Let me just get it out here. I mean, the detail in it is just incredible. And there were tablecloths and bedspreads and so many of them. And from time to time, I'd take one out and put it on my table, but it's so impractical now to have a beautiful crocheted tablecloth on your table. And so they'd always end up back in a drawer or back in the bag. And finally, I sat down with these crocheted, beautiful works. And I said, I think it's time to let them go. I don't have space to keep them. And they should go to a good home. So we decided to donate them to the hospice boutique that supports the hospice Celia House in Medford. And I felt really good about that. You know, here we were gonna do some good with my grandmother's things. But it was hard for me, the letting go. And that night, I woke up in the middle of the night and I was just thinking about my grandmother. And I started talking to her. And I told her how we were clearing out and Yuval was going to Israel and we needed to make room. And I have all these tablecloths and bedspreads and I wanted her blessing for letting them go. I didn't hear anything back. So I'm not sure how she feels about it. But what I do know is that she was with me so deeply. In those days, I felt her presence, like all the time, hovering there. And I felt like that was blessing enough, and it was a sign that she was okay with it. But I want to share one really funny story. So my grandmother, like Alan was saying about regrets, right? And I have those regrets of not having asked my dad about the days in the Navy. And, you know, he was so proud of being in the Navy, and I never asked him those questions. But my grandmother was a storyteller, and she always told her stories. So I know so much about her life that I feel like I was present when she was young. And she had 3 sisters, one who was very close in age to her. The 4 of them were inseparable, and they would do everything together every day. They lived within a 2-block radius of each other in Strawberry Mansion, Philadelphia, and they would go shopping every day together. And then they would sit and crochet, bake, whatever it was. So one time she shared the story that they went for a walk down the main street and they were going to the grocery store and they were standing in line at the store. Actually, it was in the butcher shop. And my grandmother overhears somebody telling a story. And she's listening, and the woman is saying, you know, there's something going on at that house because there's a red light in the window, and how shameful, and how could they let this happen? And she went on, and then my grandmother heard her address being said by this woman, 3229 Clifford Street. What? So my grandmother had this 3-story house, and the 3rd floor at the top, they rented out. And my grandmother was so naive. She had no idea. She thought this woman had a lot of friends. And they came to visit all the time. And here she was in the butcher store, completely shocked that the woman was a prostitute, and indeed there was a red light in the window. But as my grandmother was, she was the epitome of love. And she never, expressed any shame about that. She never put this woman down we heard this story many times. She would laugh and laugh and laugh, but never a bad word was said. And I just love that. And I always will remember that about her loving heart. So thank you. Is there anybody else that feels moved now to share our family?
My grandfather was born in the Pale of the Settlement, or Settlement of the Pale, in the early 1880s. And his mother and father were in the clothing business, and they went to deliver some goods to another town and got caught in a pogrom, and they were both killed. And my grandfather was 12 when that happened, and nobody really wanted him. So the people in the town, uh, which is Poltava, Ukraine now, they collected money and they put him on an ox cart to Odessa. And he got on a ship there. He had a much older sister in Liverpool. And I don't know how that happened, but he got on the ship, got to Liverpool. And when he was 2021, he started a clothing mill, a fabric mill, with a partner, and his partner absconded with the funds. And back then they had debtor's prison, and the police, a Bobby and a detective, came to the house. And fortunately, my grandfather wasn't there, and they spoke to his sister. So when my grandfather came back, his sister said, "You got to get out of here. They're going to come and arrest you." And she made some sandwiches. And he went down to Liverpool and stowed away on a ship. And so he was living in a lifeboat with a tarpaulin over it. And about the 8th day, they had a lifeboat drill, and he was found. And they took him up to the captain, and they wrapped him in a blanket, and they gave him some food. And the captain said, "Are you Church of England?" And my grandfather said, "No." Said, "Are you Catholic?" Said, "No." Said, "Are you Jewish?" And my grandfather said, "Yes." So they wired ahead to immigration in Nova Scotia, in Halifax. And an immigration officer was there and somebody from the Jewish community. And they said, "We'll take care of him. We'll accept him." And they took him in. And after about a week, they said, "You got to get some work. We can't support you forever." And a man came. He was wearing a cape and a top hat. It was like around the turn of the century. And he said, "I'll take care of him." And my grandfather apprenticed with this man and learned to be a pattern maker. Like in the clothing industry, you cut patterns. And at that time, there weren't enough Jewish women and men. There wasn't a good match. So there was an exchange program between a synagogue in Halifax and a synagogue in Brooklyn. And my grandfather went to Brooklyn and met who would be my grandmother. Her name was Rose. My grandfather was Willie. And Rose's father said to Grandpa Willie, said, "Let me see your bank book. I want to know if you can support her." And he took out his bank book, and he had $5 in his bank book. And Rose's father said, "No, you can't get married." So he went back to Halifax, and they exchanged letters for 2 years. And my grandfather said, "Enough of this." And he added a zero to the $5. So he had $50 in the bank book. And that's how he came to live in the States. And ultimately, that's how I came to live in the States.
Wow. What a great story, Frederick. Do you want to just introduce yourself, let folks know who you are?
Yeah, I'm Frederick Kropp. I'm in Monterey, California. I've been a member of the Havurah. This is my 3rd year. And I found you guys because Michael Belsky and Josie Wilson are my friends here. And I asked them 3 years ago, "What are you doing for the holidays?" And they said, "Oh, we're going to do it with our Havurah." And that's how I became a member.
Lucky us. Thank you so much for sharing that story, Frederick. Thank you for being part of us.
Yeah, I'm happy to be part.
It occurred to me It occurred to me a few moments ago. I just wanted to say something. It's not really a story, but I can make it a little story. Like, my mother was in Las Vegas, where she had lived for 40 years, and she was not doing well. My sister, her only daughter, had just died, and she didn't want to live, and she was and my mother was just dying. And so I sort of kidnapped her and brought her here. And she ended up having about 7 really good years. The last 2, she was very sick. She was diagnosed with cancer, though her cancer was in partial remission when she died. She died of a stroke. But the reason I wanted to come up is there are 2 people in this congregation who became my mother's angels. And if there is an object to speak to, it is muffins. Because Moshe, who is right here, and Deborah Miriam, whom many of you know, and I'm sad she's not here, brought my mother coffee and a muffin for months and months and months. They took turns. Moshe came often every week. Deborah Miriam came regularly, and they were my mother's angels, and I just wanted to honor them. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Deborah Bloom. I'm a newer member of the congregation. I moved to Medford a couple of years ago, and it's great to be part of this. My memory of my mother's mother is just so sweet. Every time I think of her, I can feel the feeling of her embracing me on her rocking chair. And she just wanted to make me happy all the time. When I'd go there, it was always tea and toast. And this was the thing, tea and toast. And I actually remember her putting me in her big white porcelain sink. She had an apartment in Brooklyn, and all those apartments were really small. The rooms were small, but I remember the sink. And I remember when I stayed with her that she had very, very long hair. My memory is that it was all the way down to the floor. Maybe it wasn't really, but it certainly seemed that way. She would sit down in the rocker and she would take her hair all apart, from the braid, and comb it through. And I was in awe of her hair. I have very vivid memories of her combing her hair, and then she would wear it in one braid at night, and then in the morning she'd comb it all out again and do 2 braids and wind them around and around. And I always thought she looked like a queen, and she was so beautiful. Well, a lot of years went by, and I also have old pictures, and I came across a picture of Bella, my grandmother. And in the photo, I'm thinking, wait a minute, is this really her? She just sort of looked like an average old lady, dressed very plainly, and her hair on top of her head. And I thought, she didn't really look that way. She was beautiful. She was a queen. And so my memory of her is that she was the queen wearing the braided crown, and I used to get to watch her, and she would rock me and sing and take care of me and just loved me no matter what all the time. So I love you, Bella.
So I hope this will be a quick story because I'm not a very quick storyteller. Okay, so some of you know my husband was an aerospace engineer, and I am a poet, a mythologist, I'm of a totally different planet. So when we first met, we had a communication problem. And but I noticed, and one of the things was that he never really got my metaphors. And so, and I think I understood his, because I always said, like, if there's a missile coming down towards me, I don't want someone using quantum physics, like, maybe it's here, maybe it's there, we'll shoot it, you know. I want Newtonian Cartesian physics. It's there, shoot it down. So we had a lot of conversations, and one of the interesting conversations we had was about, most of you are very familiar with navigation systems with your GPS and so forth. Well, Alan had a model of the stealth bomber on his desk. And I said, why do you have this model of the stealth bomber on your desk? For me, it was pretty impressive. And he said, well, I worked on the stealth bomber. And I said, oh, that's even more impressive. And I said, what did you do on the stealth bomber? Because actually, I thought all he did was be on a ship with a bunch of guys for 7 years and learn how to guy talk. But he actually worked on the stealth bomber, and what he did on the stealth bomber that I thought was so fantastic was, on the wings of the stealth bomber is glass. And if the stealth bomber's flying and the GPS system goes out, and this was what the amazing part was to me, they can look through that glass at the stars. It's called inertial navigation system. And so they navigate by the stars, and it's a kind of a backup system. And I thought that story was metaphorically the most amazing story I'd ever heard. And I told everybody, and he kept saying, why do you keep telling that story? But I thought it was very, very special and a wonderful metaphor for life, that we, if our guidance systems goes out, we can always look to the stars and find our way home.